Friday, y'all. We made it. We're here. And this is the sound of Black and Brown. CJ here. And today we're going to be talking about something that is as old as slavery, and that is reproductive justice. What does reproductive justice means to you? Well, I'm excited to tell you that in a couple minutes we're going to have someone joining us who is going to talk to us about that and her work and share with us the background on this very important topic regarding reproductive justice. I mean, black women, historically have borne the brunt of the racism, the outcome of racism, everything else. And I think that one of the lesser discussed things is the impact of slavery on black women, but also on reproductive justice. What did that do? How did that affect us? And does it still affect us? So, without further ado, our friend from Yale Bleeds is here. A couple months ago, sorry, a couple months, listen to me, a couple weeks. I'm sorry, guys, I'm tired today. I had a long night. I was invited to participate in a panel on reproductive justice by Yale Bleeds, and I am so happy, beyond excited, that one of the queens involved, a young black empress, is with us right now. Our friend Jelena. Jelena, how about you introduce yourself and tell us a bit about yourself?
Yes, thank you so much for this introduction and all we've done with Yale Bleeds so far. My name is Shalana Laws. I'm a rising sophomore at Yale University. I'm involved with Yale Bleeds, our period club on campus, and I'm really passionate about reproductive justice and also thinking about more broadly how we can decolonize our landscapes of healing. And so I'm so excited to be on this podcast today and to discuss things that are very important and specifically how these issues are affecting our Black and Brown communities.
That's amazing. So, how about you tell us a little bit about who you are, a little more about that, and what is Yale Bleeds for those who don't know what that is?
Yes, so I guess I'll begin talking about what Yale Bleeds is. So basically, we are our period advocacy club on Yale's campus. So we do a variety of things from um, fundraising to get menstrual materials to kind of collect
Mhm.
those and distribute out to the community, hosting like packing parties where we'll basically like use all the menstrual materials that we get, pack them up, and again, once again, distribute them out into the community, as well as providing like menstrual education, as well as coming together and talking about different issues that are affecting us regarding menstruation. So making sure everybody knows like the different options they have, for example, whether they want to use like
Mhm.
a tampon, a pad, a menstrual cup. Knowing like the different options that exist for them and what they feel suits their bodies and their health journeys best, as well as doing that on the like within the Yale student body as well as within the broader New Haven community is some of the work that we do.
Mhm.
So it's really about mainly education and access is the 2 points
That's
that we hit.
amazing. I don't know if you knew I shared this with you. A couple years ago, I was
Mhm.
one of the angry black people who participated in protesting against in favor of renaming Calhoun College because
Yes.
it all started with the dishwasher who saw, Corey Menifee, and he saw the pictures of slavery in a school that sits in the middle of a neighborhood which comprises of a lot of low to middle income black and brown people, undocumented, all backgrounds, right? And this was really something else for me because we would stand out there between 12 and noonish and 1 p.m. on a Friday and block traffic. And one of the things that stuck out to me with that was a lot of the students would walk by and they would say, "We support you." I mean, we did get a lot of students who participated and supported the movement, but also we had a good majority of students and employees who were like, "I want to support you, but I know that there's going to be a clap back if I do." Now, saying that, what has been your experience in terms of Yale Bleeds? Was it well received? Were there any, issues in terms of getting it recognized or participation?
I'd say that Yale Bleeds has been pretty well received. I think,
Hmm.
especially talking about what you were saying about like different students and employees who felt a sort of tension about whether they could like engage in this um, struggle to remove Calhoun name from the college. Um, I
Hmm.
think that students, possibly more than employees, have kind of that space to really like voice their concerns um, with the university about
Hmm.
various different issues.
Hmm.
Um, I find that students on Yale's campus are very adamant and very like sensitive in terms of responding to things that we see that are going wrong. And I
Mm.
think like we have that protection as students, but I don't know that that necessarily extends to all members of the Yale community. Um,
Right.
and I think that like that's something to kind of dig deep into in terms of like what Yale as an institution is, and then what
Right.
Yale as the people walking around are.
Right.
Like even in my first year
Right.
there, there's been times where I'm like, okay, there are Yale people who, there are some like of the most amazing people I've met, so passionate and so like engaged within their communities, and then there's the institution that you kind of have to grapple and fight with. And I think a lot of us are like navigating that, especially when it comes to advocacy and activism, and like
Right.
the way that we move through the community um, as Yale students, and also the way that we interact with the, like the New Haven community as well, has been like an
Hmm.
interesting line to toe.
Hmm.
So yeah.
I think that's amazing because I can personally attest to have had a great working rapport with several students and staff. I could say that to this
Mm-hmm.
day, right? I love where you're thinking because the sad part is when I encounter the people who say, CJ, I would have loved to support that, but you know what I mean? Like there's the invisible but. Like we found that with the whole Calhoun College protest. Like mostly staff, like the students were great. You guys were amazing. They were willing to participate in the civil disobediences. They were willing to help us in terms of delivering letters and all of that. But the staff, you could tell they were afraid. Like, but it makes
Yeah.
sense, right? Because that's your money. So speaking of
Yeah.
staff,
Mm-hmm.
I want to jump onto something here that I'm gonna let all the listeners know in advance. I think that this topic here will get our little friend Jelena here going because our friend here, she's very vested in empowering and improving us as a people, right? And in conversation with her before today, we agree we have to talk about this stuff. We have to talk about this stuff. Now, as part of Black and Brown United in Action, we also do reproductive justice advocacy. And one of the things that I'm looking forward to working with Yale Bleeds and others with is really informing people on their rights, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because the truth is, um, reproductive injustice as old as slavery.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, gynecology. We could go back in there. You want to jump in there, Jelena?
Yes, of course.
Do it, girl. Go.
Yeah,
I know
so
she was waiting. Do it. Go.
for context, I actually study the history of science, medicine, and public health and African American
Mhm.
studies at school. So like I've written so many papers, sat in so many lectures,
Mhm.
seminars, like just kind of just talking about the same thing. So yeah,
Mhm.
talking about slavery, even the onslaught of like European colonization, the way that
Mhm.
racism
Mhm.
and racist
Mhm. Go,
ideologies
girl.
emerged are very
Mhm.
deeply entrenched in ideas of reproduction as it pertains to Black women in particular. Um,
Mhm.
and especially during slavery, Black women's bodies were exploited as sites of reproduction for expanding the labor force, especially after you see um, this is all throughout the Western Hemisphere in which you see slavery occurring. But if we
Mhm.
want to particularly talk about the United States, especially after
Ooh.
the end
You
of
start
the
you starting that shit. Talk that shit. Come on, let's go. Let's go.
especially
Because people
after
deny it. People deny it.
yeah,
Like they
exactly.
deny
Yeah.
it. Yes, go.
Especially after the end of the transatlantic slave trade, there
Woo,
becomes
they
an
said that's
even
what it. No, let's no. I have a different opinion here. I think
mm,
they said it ended, but I think if we go find a couple domestic workers and restaurant employees, um, they
yes,
might say
yeah.
something different. You know?
Yes, slavery definitely persists in all its different forms to this very day.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
reproductive abuses do as well. I mean, we see like the commodification of black women's wombs in slavery, and that persists to this day in terms of, you know, how black women's bodies are literally tied to monetary values, whether that is during slavery
Mhm.
to support a system of slavery and to be profited upon, or whether we see,
Mhm.
especially following the, and we'll call it the quote unquote end or quote unquote abolition of slavery,
Mm.
we see a
Mm.
kind of like a shift towards the devaluing, I guess you could say, of black women's
Mhm.
wombs in terms of now black people are a burden rather than a profit. And so the way with black reproduction will be very different. So we see a history of
Mhm.
forced sterilizations and different things like that, coerced sterilizations among black and brown people in the United States. And
Mm.
so our history here is very taught with
Mm.
every issue
Woo,
we
preach.
see affecting like racism and specifically
Mm.
intersectional forms of struggle, especially thinking about misogyny, we see like that they're all very tied to reproduction in terms of the way
Mhm.
that reproduction is used as like a line or a delineation of race. So we
Mm.
see like a lot of struggle there and a lot of contention there with those histories, that I think is very important to grapple with as we are talking
Mhm.
about reproductive justice, because a lot of our understandings of reproductive rights are very
Mm. Mhm.
whitewashed, especially in the
Mhm.
mainstream. And I really, there's a book by um, Dorothy Roberts called Killing the Black Body. And I think she really grapples with this history well in terms of tracing from slavery all the way to the present day, how Black women
Mhm.
have undergone reproductive oppression. And that's why I think reproductive justice is a very um, helpful framework for thinking about how women can achieve, or anybody who reproduces can achieve um, autonomy
Mhm.
over their bodies, because reproductive justice acknowledges that you have the right to bear children, you have the right not to
Mhm.
bear children, and if
Mhm.
you so decide to bear children, then you have the right to raise those children in safe and healthy environments. And I think it's a very
That's
comprehensive way of looking at, this
mhm.
idea of reproduction that has been such a site of oppression and injustice historically,
Mhm.
especially for Black people. So yeah.
So, for those listening in, tuning in, and just so you know, this is being recorded live, but it will be uploaded afterwards. For those who want to, tune in late or, just want to listen to us talk about this some more, that's great. We love it. If y'all thought you just unloaded, I'm about to really get this child going. So, I love you so much, Jelena. Let's get it going. We got to get these people educated. So, here I'm going to read an excerpt from what was published in 2019, Black Maternal and Infant Health Historical
Mm,
Legacies of Slavery by Deidre Cooper Owens and Charlotte M. Fred.
yes.
Now, here's a brief abstract, and I would love your comments after this, sister.
Mm-hmm.
The legacies of slavery today are seen in structural racism that has resulted in disproportionate maternal and infant death among African Americans. The deep roots of these patterns of disparity in maternal and infant health lie with the commodification of enslaved Black women's childbearing and physicians' investment in serving the interests of slave owners. Even certain medical specializations, such as obstetrics, I cannot pronounce that word right now, and gynecology, or adapt to enslaved women who became experimental subjects in the development of the field. Public health initiatives must acknowledge its historical legacies by addressing institutionalized racism, Lord. Woo! And implicit bias. Oh, Lord, yo, she about to get going. Trust me, I could hear that getting dimmer and dimmer. In medicine, while promoting programs that remedy socially embedded health disparities. Now, y'all, take a breath. I'm going to hand this over to the queen here. Break that down to these people so they know what was just said in a. That was like an anime punch, wasn't it?
Yeah,
Bam.
packed a lot of power in there. Yeah.
Yes,
Um,
ma'am. Take it away.
yes. So as we kind of discussed earlier, there's this commodification of Black women's wombs under slavery to kind of reproduce labor force, but there is also a very important history of the exploitation of Black women um,
Mm.
as experimental, and I would say objects. I know we sometimes say subjects, but it's really objects, the ways in which their bodies are being used to kind of bolster
Yeah,
this
because they
field.
conducted all kinds of studies, right?
Exactly, for gynecology. So we have this
Mm-hmm.
father of American gynecology, as he is like known, or as he was known for a while, though there has been like more pushback
Mm.
recently. James Marion Sims, and essentially he kept like journals of these experiments
Jeez.
as well, and they were published and then
They were gross.
replicated by other doctors, and just crazy. But he conducted experiments on enslaved women to
Mm.
kind of.
Can you give examples of the type for those who don't know or never heard of
Mhm.
it? Can you just share a little more what that means by experiments? Because I want people to really
Yeah,
understand. Like
one.
this wasn't as simple as, hey, look at the letters over there. Not saying that we hate our optometrists,
Yes,
but
yeah.
there was some serious shit that happened. So please go dig in there.
One of the major surgeries that he aimed to perfect on the bodies of enslaved women was vaginal fistula repair, and this
What
is
the
like
fuck is that? Oh my god!
where
Would
there's
you
a
just call me? We just met each other. What is wrong with you?
yes, where there is a it's essentially a tear within a woman, like it was a tear
I know.
within women's reproductive system. And this was like a very painful surgery. As he said, this is vaginal fistula. This is a very sensitive area of the body.
Well,
But
what do you
regardless,
mean
it was.
by like let's get a picture here because we're talking
Mhm.
about going between a woman's legs, no? And with some real sharp shit, like
Yes,
right? Do I
yes,
have it right? Mhm.
yes, absolutely right. And well, I'd like to ground from the very beginning that um the first there are like it's such a insane like experiment, and such a harmful and evil and exploitative experiment that sometimes you can overlook like the different levels of
Mm.
exploitation that exist within this one experiment. So
Woo!
on the
You
one
came on here
hand,
to preach today. You came on here to talk about that. Talk to them. Teach them.
um
Mhm.
so yeah, on the one hand, ideas of consent as it relates to reproduction and as it relates to these experiments that are being conducted are essentially they all that our traditional ideas of consent basically fall short here. So on the
Mm.
one hand, this is an exploitation that enslaved women in their position as enslaved
Mhm.
women are incapable of consenting to. So that is already like a degree of violence in the fact that harm is being committed to their bodies um, without their consent. And it is absolutely egregious harm, but I think that it's important to acknowledge that first very seemingly simplistic level of harm.
Mhm.
But then there are
Mhm.
obviously the very gross and gory details of these experiments as well. These
Mm.
experiments were so painful that James Marion Sims had assistants present with him, white male assistants present with him during the surgery. And due to
Mhm.
the screams of these enslaved women, they actually left, and the enslaved women were left to hold each other down themselves
Oh my
because it was
God.
this painful.
But wait a minute. We're not surprised. Pause right
No,
there. Let me
yeah.
stop right there. For those listening. Let me tell you why we're not surprised. The first one of the first set of immigrants came on a big ass ship, and they had to lie on top of each other like sardines.
Mm-hmm.
That was not a cruise. Okay, it was painful.
Yes.
Slavery is embedded in pain because Satan sells and white supremacists, they love that. Who the fuck else will get entertained off of hanging somebody or
Mm-hmm.
beating them to death or skinning them alive? These people were ridiculous. And so it's not beyond them. See, they try to make it sound like, we did all these groundbreaking studies. No, 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 no. Read up the history on these studies and who they used and how they used them. Sorry, Jelena, continue.
No, yeah, of course. But you're absolutely right. I mean, this is nothing, and the reason I'm approaching it this way is because this is obviously a very blatantly violent
Yes,
um this is, yeah,
yes.
blatantly violent act, but
It's rape. It was rape. It was
yes,
justified rape. That's how I
yes,
see it.
but it's not shocking because it rests
No,
upon a system that is completely founded in violence and instituted by violence and perpetuates violence. So this is nothing.
it's nothing. Sadly, it's not surprising, but you see, they don't want to
Exactly.
talk about it. And you see, now
Yeah.
I'm going to read a quote here from an interview with Deirdre on,
Mm-hmm.
this was back in 2020, on the brutal roots of gynecology in terms of slavery,
Mm-hmm.
right? And this is by UC Berkeley. And Ms. Owen says in here, when the Constitution banned the international slave trade, there became an issue with how the U.S. was going to maintain and grow its very lucrative system of slavery. The solution was to concentrate on natural increases, which simply meant making sure enslaved women had children
Mm-hmm.
who lived past the age of one, because slavery was a condition that was passed to the child from the mother.
Yeah.
What this did was lay at the feet of black women an added responsibility to have more children. Now, here's the thing. You and I both know. I'm about to go there. You ready? I know you're there. This is why I get aggravated when black and brown women look at me and they try to say that abortions will kill you. This right here.
Mm-hmm.
Because you don't know your truth. What's your thoughts on that, Jelena?
I think this is very interesting. I remember doing a classroom presentation on specifically attitudes towards abortion within the Black community. Now,
Mm-hmm.
we have this legacy of enslaved women's wombs being exploited for profit and being subject to conditions that were, by all means, what we would call unhealthy. That is an understatement, but by all means, unhealthy. And that is
Mm-hmm.
not, and we see that continue today with maternal health rates among, or yeah, maternal health rates among Black women, and specifically maternal mortality rates among Black women.
Mm.
Um, I think
Mm-hmm.
sometimes, the history of reproductive oppression with Black women is very complex. There
Yes,
have
it is.
been concerns among the Black community about, with concerning histories of forced sterilization, for example, about abortion as like race suicide or different things like that. But I think it's important to know, for one, and especially
Mm-hmm.
when it comes to when we're talking about state laws and different things like that, that laws are protecting someone's right to make a choice about their body based on what they believe is best for their health, or what they believe is best for their lives in general, what they believe
Mm-hmm.
would suit them. And I think it's
Mm-hmm.
very important that we don't try to, or for people who feel that way, that they don't try to impose upon other people, upon the state, a personal belief that
Mm-hmm.
they're having. I'm not
Mm-hmm.
saying that, like, I'm not saying about anyone's personal beliefs or what they should be necessarily for themselves, what they
Right.
would
You're
do
not
for
their
their own
conscience.
body,
If
right?
you don't want to do it, you don't want to do it.
But we are
But if
protecting
somebody,
other people's
right,
rights to
right.
do so. Yeah.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
I think that's very interesting, but I will say also when it comes to the idea that abortion will kill you, abortion, unhealthy, unregulated abortions
Mhm.
will kill you, and those
Mhm.
rise in
Mhm.
relation to certain bans that are going on in our country, right? If
Mhm.
you are a low income, um, you are a low income person who has become pregnant and you don't have means to travel to a state where you can get an abortion, you don't have a
Mhm.
means to, or you're not in the place, regardless of what those means might be, to support um, a child at that time, you may go to the next feasible option for you, which would be to get an unregulated abortion, to get an unsafe abortion. And that really could kill you. That really could kill you. And we
Mhm.
see statistics about that. And we see statistics of even um, Black women who choose to birth um,
Mhm.
within our regulated health system that are subject to racism and medical
Mhm.
racism and discrimination, who are living in the legacies of the same lies about Black women's bodies that allowed James Marion Sims experiments to persist, about susceptibilities to pain and about racial difference between Black and white bodies. They're
Mhm.
subject to that, and we also see devastating fatal results in that manner. So I think it's really important to put the autonomy and to put the choice and the agency in the hands of the person who will be doing the birthing, rather than try to impose personal beliefs. Whatever they are, you are protecting a very individual, a very personal, a very intimate right for that
Mhm.
person.
I love that
Yeah.
you mentioned that because I, I grew up in Trinidad and Tobago, and
Mm,
I went to an all girls high school
mm,
myself. I'm a survivor of sexual assault.
mm-hmm,
It wasn't the best way to lose my virginity, but it happened. I'm here to talk about it.
yeah.
What I'll tell you is, out of that, I became pregnant, and at the age I was a teenager, terrified. No, I think that I did something wrong. It's already terrifying to be in that position. What I found out years later is what some of my friends, people I didn't even know they were doing it, the stuff they would do to themselves when they thought they were doing it. I mean, you're talking about hangers, you're talking about Guinness, hot Guinness being
Mm,
inserted. You're talking about some aunt of somebody who does things at this place. You know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah.
you're talking about prayer circles. Like, it was all of it. So I really appreciate your identifying that, it's not that we're telling you everybody go run outside and have an abortion. It's just that really this conversation about abortion rights, in my opinion, is about the safety, right? Because there are people who are doing some real harmful things to themselves. And there's also the point of, if I keep the baby, the mental wellness and health impact. Do I
Yeah.
not have a right to protect myself? Do I not have the right to decide that maybe I don't want this yet? Why are we shaming our people, right? Now, if
Mm-hmm.
you grew up in the type of environment where you're against it and you want to have your baby, that's fine. But to me, don't talk the other person out of exercising their choice and right. That's what I think on that. What do you think? I mean, you already said it, but I feel like we're saying the same thing.
Yeah.
I mean, right? Like that's what it is. And what I get frustrated with, because I also used to go in front of Planned Parenthood years ago, and on a Saturday, I used to join a couple of comrades of mine when they would be protesting against the anti-abortion people. I mean, these people would show up with pictures of fried chicken, dead ass. This thing will look
Oh my
like a chicken
goodness.
strip. And they're trying to tell people, well, if you go into Planned Parenthood, this is what your fetus is going to look like. So it's the continual miseducation, I
Yeah.
feel, of reproductive justice. It manifests itself in different areas. Also, too,
Mm-hmm.
when Black and Brown United in Action last legislative session, when we were working on the menstrual equity bill,
Mm,
One of the interesting things I came across out of nowhere, because I knew it was there. It was one of those things that I knew was there, but I hadn't had to really think about it, were people who were against using tampons and menstrual cups, because rather than, have a safe, healthy period and change their, you know, their menstrual product regularly, right? They would rather use a pad so that they could stand up wherever they're working for hours. Now, if you dig into that now, you know who else thought that they had to use a rag or whatever they could find just so they could continue working? Slaves. It
mm,
all goes back to slavery, Jelena. It all goes back to that mentality, goes right back to slavery. Whether you support abortions, whether you don't, whether you believe in certain health practices or not, you'll find that slavery is going to come up. You can't run away from that. But I feel like us as black and brown people, we need to talk about that, because I feel like some of us let go of our internalized fear, because that fear, some of it is passed down. What do
mm.
you think of that?
I agree. I think coming reckoning like with this history of this violence against black bodies, I think that we definitely live in a legacy of that, and I think sometimes we perpetuate it onto ourselves or perpetuate it onto others in our community.
Mhm.
I think that a lot of stigmas persist as it relates to menstrual health and reproductive health. Um, I think there's a lot of taboos in terms of how we talk about this as well.
Mhm.
Um, for one, there's like a stereotype that is a lot of times imposed upon Black women and girls about like this idea of adultification or hypersexualization that, you know, um, Black girls will like are more secure than like white girls, for example, or something like that. And that affects the way that you talk about your sexual health, or that
Mhm.
black women's sexual health is talked about by others, say that. And I find like
Mhm.
in my experience I have seen as a sort of resistance to that hypersexualization, there is a sort of, oh, let's be like hush hush, about these very important topics, about our menstrual health, about our reproductive health. And what
Mhm.
happens when you have that sort of attitude, let's be quiet about it, let's not talk about it, let's keep our heads down, let's say
Mhm.
only what needs to be said, um,
Mhm.
then that creates a kind of void where misinformation can persist, and
Mhm.
where through the lack of open, honest conversations about our
Mhm.
bodies, um, we allow misconceptions and lies to be planted, and to grow and to become these very
Mhm.
large things that actually perpetuate harm in our communities. So I think
Mhm.
that we're definitely living in a legacy of that. And I think, honestly, the way to break that is like one very open, honest conversation. But then also,
Absolutely.
our communities need resources, we need access
Yes.
to
Yes.
the products we need, for example, or like anything we need regarding reproductive health, mental health. We need
Mhm.
access to those because our communities are can be very deeply under resourced. So it's important to
Yes.
balance what we say with what
What
is
we
said with
do.
the actions is exactly with what we do.
Yes, because
Yeah.
when we worked on the menstrual equity bill, man, there was stuff that unfortunately I knew it was there, but it's just like you hear the stories, hearing the stories of the women who live in shelters and what they would have to go through during their
Mm,
period, right?
yeah.
Or the women in jail who take one tampon and they have to make that into mini tampons. What happens when you have a heavy flow? What do you do,
Hmm.
right? And then they're using cloth. They're creating, cloth tampons, which is fine, but they're not sanitary, because where are they washing these things? It's not like these folks could go use, the laundromat around the corner. That's not how jail works, right?
Hmm.
Or back to the shelters. You go to the shelter and you're having a heavy period and you ran out of menstrual product in the middle of the night. What do you do? What do you do? Well, how about our sex workers? Don't they deserve to have access to these products as well. I mean, the stigmatization
Mm-hmm.
of the people that I just mentioned is a whole other aspect of the offspring, as I like to call it, of slavery. Because that's what
Yeah.
slavery taught us to do. It taught us to label, stigmatize, and to move on from there. I think you're absolutely correct about the, you know, honest but necessary conversation because it's going on for too long. Now we have a legacy of women doing harm to themselves without knowing it
Yeah.
because they're not taking care of themselves properly. And your menstrual health is part of that.
Yeah.
It's okay to call out, listen, if I had it my way, calling out for menstrual cramps would be covered. I'm so serious.
Mm-hmm.
I never
Wow.
understood why that can't be part of your PTO. See?
Yeah,
Part of my
I
sick days,
absolutely agree. Yeah. And
right?
it's because the system that we're working under in terms of like workers protection and like
Mhm.
what counts as time off, even if we look at like maternity leave and things like that, it's very much still deeply entrenched in the idea of this very male workforce. And so these
Yes.
considerations for like paid time off um,
Mhm.
for cramps and different things like that
Mhm.
that are tied to reproductive health, menstrual health, and things like that um,
Mhm.
are not considered um,
No.
at all, and
No.
it
Mm-mm.
affects women's experiences in the workplace as well,
Of
because it's
course
like,
it
how
does.
can I show up fully if I'm not in a healthy place, but I'm still here,
But not
So
only that, let's not forget, right? Let's not forget one of the things slave owners did as a form of intimidation was to sexually assault slaves in front of each other.
mm-hmm.
They would rape the young girls and, the women. But then they would also, rape the men. Bucking is what they call that. They
Yes,
took
yeah.
enjoyment in that in different ways. They would also have these babies, these little babies, and depending on their skin tone, would define if they would claim them to a degree or not, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I think it's important for us to acknowledge that and to see it for what it was. Because the truth is, what we know about slavery is based on what we have found out so far. So far. And I'm saying that because what we found out so far were not compliments. The truth is,
Mm-hmm.
historically, um, the United States tries to play down how horrible slavery was in this country when we all know it was that bad and it's still being maintained today. And if you felt like that wasn't true, then why are we still marching?
Mm.
Why? Why is it so unbelievable to have a black female president? Why? Why is it that we have so many white people representing our causes? Why is it are we so scared to acknowledge black trans lives? Talk to me,
Mm.
Jelena. What you think?
Wow, there's so much to unpack there for sure.
Go
um
ahead, pack it on.
yeah. i think I think a lot of this is systemic as well. I think because, as you keep saying, a lot of these issues are tying back to slavery. And I think it's
Mhm.
because slavery is a very um, foundational system in this country. And even when you were giving examples about
Mhm.
shelters and prisons and sex workers, I think the conditions that our country subjects groups of people to are definitely perpetuations of slavery. It's definitely
Mhm.
reproductions of slavery. And I don't think our country as it is now could persist without those perpetuations of slavery, because slavery is very
Correct.
foundational to what it is. And so
Correct.
I think in terms of why can't we see these manifestations of the justice that we've been striving for centuries. um, I think it's that very thing, is that these systems that we often have to work within, or we often have to appeal to achieve justice, have
Right.
very violent foundations that first need to be um, uncovered, acknowledged, reconstructed, if not destroyed, before we can truly attain a just environment for ourselves. I think
Mhm.
that's why it continues to persist, for sure. Um,
Mhm.
and I think
Mhm.
that's also why in reproductive health and reproductive justice, that's why we see such clear parallels as well. Because, like I
Mhm.
said, the history of reproduction um, is so deeply linked with the history of slavery that these parallels
Mhm.
undoubtedly will show up throughout time, even though we like to believe, or the United States likes to believe, that it is far beyond those things, and that that is something of the past, that is something that has ended, when it truly has not ended at
Mhm.
all.
And also too, while we're sitting there talking about slavery, because you have to talk about it. Let us not forget that that era also, and I mean, some folks might laugh when I say this, but they were actually performing unhealthy and illegal abortion. And this is
Mm-hmm.
why the healthy abortions again become a big deal. It's a choice. These women, some of these women lost their children not by choice, right?
Mm-hmm.
They got beaten, the baby got beaten out of them, or, other things happened, right? Like they were tortured, they were stressed out to the point they had a miscarriage, or they end up killing their own child out of fear.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? All of this constitutes reproductive justice history, right? I just made up that term, I
Yeah.
think. But it's important for us to acknowledge where we came from in order to know where we're going. And that is why when I was first approached for the opportunity to work with Yale Bleeds. Now, for those who are somewhat familiar with me, you may say, oh, God, right? Yes, I'm known for calling out the white supremacy, but let me tell you something. I actually do have some great comrades in various places, and actually quite a few at Yale. And one of the reasons why I will continue to call Yale out is because, not because I'm bored, but because I know that there are a lot of people there who actually want to see this change. And I applaud you all at Yale Bleeds. Just the name alone, I love the name. I have to tell you, because to me, the impact here is profound, right?
Mm.
Here is an institution that was built on slavery, and here are students saying, wait a minute, here's what we're going to drag up out of our own past.
Mm.
Here's what we're going to talk about. We here at Yale, we're going to talk about this, and we're going to make the change that needs to happen, right?
Yeah.
How about some of the projects you guys are working on so folks know a little bit more about where y'all are headed?
Yes. So I think I kind of said at the beginning that our two main focal points for us have been education and access, in terms
Hmm.
of addressing menstrual health and menstrual justice, because period poverty is still a huge problem
Yes,
in
it
this
is.
country. Um,
Yes, it is.
and you could
And in
think,
this area,
in
and
this
in this
area,
area in New Haven. Let me just say this.
yes.
I live in New Hallville. It's
Mm,
one of the poorest sections of New Haven. There's a lot of slave history here, right? And one of the things I'd like to suggest, I hope that when you all do the education and outreach, one of the things that I would love to see Yale do more is actually
mm,
come to where the community is. Because you
mm,
see, what's happening is a lot of you people wouldn't know. I get the lovely email, so I get to see it.
yeah.
But most people don't know about the different educational events. You see, the average person would seem to think that it's just a bunch of rich, pompous students and they don't care
Mm-hmm.
about anything. And that is not true. Let me tell you all, some of these students have done things that had my jaw like, what the hell? No, but I told them to do it. I just was like, I didn't think he was really going. But also, I've sat across from them and we've done some amazing work. We've written laws together. We have faced off with the Board of Alders and different
Mm,
lawmakers together. So I know personally that while there are so many who remind us of and carry on that negativity. There's also the Jelinas and the Maddies. I mean, come up, talk about a group of strong women. Let me tell you, when I met with that on that panel, I was in shock. I
Mm.
honestly didn't know what to expect, because I'm going to the side of the school that I'm like, oh Lord, I expect to encounter a bunch of uppity, um, soon to be lawyers and stuff. Instead, there's a big ass cake, which I couldn't get over that. That cake, I looked at the cake and I felt full. But wait a minute, there was more cake, and I love that for us, right?
Yes.
I love that the students came in and they sat down. And let me tell you all, it was not what I thought, only because when I was walking up to it and I saw who was walking around, I was like, oh boy, I hope there's at least one other Black person with me. I really didn't know what
Mm.
to think, because while I've had good experiences, I've also been the token sometimes,
Yeah.
right? But, but, but wait. I sat with you all at Yale Bleeds, and I was just like, this is amazing. It's really great. And just so you know, I mentioned this to some other great students that I know at UConn, and they
Mm.
were like, that's amazing, because they would love to link this work. I think that's friggin' powerful.
Yeah.
Imagine having people from different campuses talking to each other about this and just forming. I would love to be part of that. You hear me hinting it. So,
Yes. Yeah.
um, I think we
I'll
should
be
go in that,
sharing
because,
with them. Yeah.
because that's where we're at, Jelena. We're there.
Mm.
There's no more brushing it under the rug, right? We have more and more students, because here's another piece of the reproductive, um, justice and the slavery piece that I want us to really marinate on.
Mm.
Gender identity was always a thing.
Mm.
It was always a thing. However, the way that history was written and most of us were taught, we were given a book and said, okay, you're going to praise this person and believe all what's said in these pages. And that's
Yeah.
that. And from those pages, we were told that, hate things like homosexuality. So,
Mm.
what people fail to realize, even way back then, believe it or not, there were folks, you know, fighting to be secure in their gender identity, right?
Mm.
They
Yeah.
were there. But we don't talk about that, and to this day, those same people are still being discriminated against. Still, still, it's still
Mm.
happening. And all of that to me comes under this umbrella of reproductive justice,
Yeah.
right? Where do you see the reproductive justice movement going? Like, looking at from what it, in fact, wait, before you answer that,
Mm.
do you feel that considering the work done in reproductive justice, and be as honest as you feel comfortable being, do you feel like in 2023, did we really do a lot? Did we progress?
That's a great question. I think I think definitely I don't think we've done as much. I don't think we've achieved, I think what I'm trying to
Mm.
say.
Agreed.
This
Agreed.
pinnacle or this idea of reproductive justice, because what I don't want to say is that work hasn't been done, because a lot of really important work has
Agreed.
been done by very
Agreed.
dedicated people, but I don't think we're
Mhm.
anywhere near um, achieving reproductive justice as it should be. um,
Mhm.
I think one of the critical things that we'll have to do in order to achieve that is, and I love how like you sign off on things with, it's a pleasure being solidarity with you, because I think solidarity is like a very
I know
important,
I'm corny. I'm corny.
no, but I love it, because I think solidarity is like is a key concept, because I think an
Thank
important
you.
thing to acknowledge with reproductive justice is how, and reproductive injustice on the inverse, is how interconnected it is with other forms of justice slash injustice,
Mhm.
economic injustice, environmental injustice, racial injustice. These are all very deeply intertwined. And I think
Mhm.
that reproductive justice, it cannot happen in a silo,
Mhm.
from these other forms of justice, because these are communities that are having very intertwined and intersectional struggles, and they are being affected, um, as well. So, like, for example, and I'm gonna bring up Yale and the community of New Haven, for
Oh
example.
Lord.
Yale
Oh wow. Wait,
is
hold up. Everybody's so surprised. Let me tell you. Sarcasm, sarcasm.
Yale is like a huge, I would
Yeah.
say, yeah, a huge perpetrator of economic injustice, for example,
Oh,
to the community
really?
of Haiti. What? Like,
What? You know what? You
exactly.
know what? Let me check my pressure. You sure? Yale? Oh, come
Yale.
on a Friday.
No
The
way.
nerve.
Yes, but like, even the idea that Yale is not paying its property taxes, how much money, like how
Mm.
much money has Yale stolen from the community of
Well,
Haven in however many
well,
hundreds of
tax
years it's been
Yale.
around,
Tax Yale.
right? At Yale. And it's like, that cannot be disentangled from the fact that there is immense period poverty in New Haven. Um,
Mhm.
and like, that's just one of the examples of the ways that it's so interconnected with other forms of
Well, wait a
justice that
minute.
I
Pause
think.
right there. Whoa,
Hmm.
whoa, 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 whoa. I gotta give you a minute to acknowledge Yale's role in victim shaming. Because a little
Yes.
known fact about Yale, right? See, here's where I get frustrated. Yeah, we know there's a snobby Republican trumpet, DeSantis, blah, blah. However,
Mm,
there's actually an increasing population of low to middle income people who are very interested in attending Yale. One of the things I wish New Haven had done, and they could
mm,
still do it, is get Yale to agree to pay for at least 35 New Haven students to attend for free.
mm,
When you start doing shit like that, I might start to look at you and say, you could do something. See, because really, the people who are the problem are the ones who maintain the oppression. And we all
mm,
know capitalism is successful where there is no empathy. Everything I
mm,
just said there is relative to wealth, right? When you
right.
have wealth, you have the privilege not to care. And that's the problem because you see, traditionally, Yale being an Ivy League school, it became a house for the rich. That doesn't mean they're smart.
Mm.
I hate to bust the bubble. Shit. Fuck wrong with you. The smartest students I met at Yale were the poorest people. Dead ass.
Mm.
Right? The rich, snobby ones.
Yeah.
I'm saying it. You're not saying it. Shit. I'll say it. The fucking rich ones, some of them, I have met privileged students and they'll come out, they'll say, look, they will lay out the law. It's there. They crack me up. Anytime a student from Yale or a facility such as comes up to somebody like me and they start off with a disclaimer, I'll give you one. A student when I was doing menstrual equity, right? And I've known her for a while. She's actually a law student. She's a great person. And she saw me doing the advocacy for the menstrual equity bill. I love her to pieces. This poor chick texts me a whole disclaimer like, I would love to advocate for the menstrual equity bill, but I grew up where I could afford tampons, so I don't want to take the lead. I'm like, yo, calm down. No, but I appreciated it because
Yeah.
she wasn't ashamed to admit her privilege. It was hilarious. I mean,
Yeah.
she and I were cracking up. But at the same time, what Yale doesn't tell everybody about is there's actually a decent sized population of working and poor middle income students
Yeah.
who are out here on scholarships and
Hmm.
they're being treated like shit, right? They're being treated like shit because they don't have the money, the moolah, right? So
Mm.
they don't have to say. But these are some of the smartest people. These are the people who are pressing for the change. Those are the people I work with. Them right
Yeah.
there. You see? So I think it's great. And I think that it's really important that people realize, listen to what we're saying. This young lady is talking about menstrual equity at a school which is historically recognized for being about privilege. You hear Yale, you think privilege. It's Ivy League.
Yeah.
So you say to yourself, who the fuck can't afford tampons? Well, guess what? There are students who cannot. They can't,
Yeah.
right? Or they
Yeah.
have questions or they have concerns about their reproductive health and they don't have access because it's not just about the tampons either. Not that the tampons aren't significant or the menstrual cups or menstrual equity, but what about the reproductive health? What if I don't
Mm.
want to talk to everybody about my itchy thing,
Yeah.
right?
Mm.
It's embarrassing. Like people need to know that. Like not all students have private insurance, and so therefore, when they come across various life events, that odd period, that sexual encounter that
Mm.
may have gone, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Their options are limited, right?
Right.
See?
Yeah.
And there are also other aspects to reproductive justice that I'd like folks to consider the mental health side,
Mm.
right? You need to have access to mental wellness. I prefer to say mental wellness, Janelle,
Yeah.
because what I'm trying to do with this podcast and with Black and Brown United in Action, we're challenging the narrative. And I feel like the term health in Black and Brown communities is heavily stigmatized. So
Mm.
when you say mental health, the first thing, and this again goes back to slavery, and I've had this conversation with comrades, people that I've marched with, people I've done great things with. But when I say mental health and I say, yo, I talk to a therapist, you should, you ever thought about that? They get very defensive,
Mm.
very, very, very defensive. Why? Because historically, we were not supposed to have mental health. You're supposed to get fucked up, get beaten, raped,
Yeah.
sodomized, you know,
Yeah.
tortured, and just grin and bear it. The fact that these people would do some of this shit and then call out other slaves to watch, that's how sick they were.
Mm.
And don't sit there and think that women were having babies at hospitals with the proper postpartum care. That's a whole other thing right there.
Yeah.
Lord knows. Lord knows. A lot of these women were afflicted with depression, anxiety, PTSD because you just had a baby. I know you're bearing a baby into slavery. I know you got to live with that. And then you don't even know if you'll get to see your baby into adulthood.
Mm.
So you see, the slavery, the history is there.
Yeah.
What's your final thoughts on this?
Wow. Yeah. I
Mm.
do want to agree with you and just say real quick on that mental health note. It
Mm-hmm.
is incredibly important. I think there's yeah, that's a whole other conversation, but there definitely is a history of abuse within um, the medical field, which we'll call the medical field of mental health against
Mm-hmm.
Black people. In terms of there was even
Absolutely.
running away, like seeking freedom from
Mm.
slavery by running,
Mm.
was declared a mental illness. Like I think they called
Mm-hmm.
it uh, drapetomania or something like that, but it was declared a mental
Right.
illness to seek freedom. So I think, yeah, what you're saying about like like the connections between mental health, reproductive health, and the legacies that we carry with that within the Black community, and also how we can seek justice within the Black community. They're very tied together. Um, but
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I guess final thoughts on this like
Take your time. No rush here. Take your
wonderful
time.
conversation we've had.
Oh, it's not the last one. You do know that, right?
Yes.
We're BFFs now. We're BFFs. What I will need you to do, because I have purple here, I'm gonna need you to pick a section and just go ahead and dye that purple because we rolling out. This is what, just so folks know, this is not the end of this because our friend here is gonna come back and we
Yes.
have more to talk about. But continue your thoughts. Sorry.
No, no, you're good. I think we started this conversation talking about how we started this conversation actually thinking about institutions as well in terms of Yale and what
Yes.
we have to do and what it has to answer for, but also talking about this very foundational institution for this country that has structured the way this country operates, that is slavery, and
Mhm.
knowing the history of the reproductive oppression and injustice that is founded in slavery and what went on from the exploitation of enslaved women's wombs to the exploitation of their bodies as experimental objects, all the way through history with, histories of forced and coerced sterilization and the targeting of Black and brown folks in terms of their reproduction and the commodifications of their bodies and different things like that. I think to start, it's important to know that history and to be grounded in that history to understand why the current issues we're seeing with reproductive injustice today
Mhm.
are the way they
Mhm.
are, and also
Mhm.
including those histories in the mainstream conversations because they are often overshadowed by white middle class interests.
Yeah, girl, talk that talk. Come on now, y'all. This child came up here to preach, y'all. Don't y'all know? Somebody better start a wave or something. This is something. Keep on going, girl. Keep it on. Keep it on.
So I
Teach him.
think I think it's important to know these histories for one as ourselves as
Mhm.
communities who are advocating to get the resources we need and to guide the conversations that need having. I think it's incredibly important to ground that in the history, as well as I think knowing that history gives us the language to then call out exactly what needs to be called out and to know exactly how things ended up the way they are. So on one hand, I think that's important, and I think another thing that's important is building these connections that we're doing right now,
Mhm.
like with making this conversation, with the
Mhm.
relationship between Black and Brown United and Yale Bleed. um,
Mhm.
I think building those connections, pooling those resources, really like building coalition around these issues is
Mhm.
super important. And I think that's the only way that we can move towards justice is realizing, I think you made an important point about like acknowledging privilege where
Mhm.
someone has privilege, but understanding that
Mhm.
that privilege does not have to stop them from being in action with us to
Mhm.
work towards justice and to
Mhm.
acknowledging that privilege and then moving towards justice,
Mhm.
knowing that that's there, because I think it can be a difficult thing, in terms of whose voices overshadow a conversation, right? Like
Mhm.
and whose voices are going to be heard. It might be more, Yale might listen to someone who more privileged, whether because of race or class. They
Right.
might be more privy to listen to that person. And perhaps that might be a door in, but I think it's very important for then at that point for the voices of the people who are most affected by an issue and who
Mhm.
historically have been barred from these conversations to be brought in, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
And to be kind of the center focus because we have an understanding, we have these lived experiences
Mhm.
pertaining to these injustices that we have endured and experienced and that affect our real lives, right? And so I
Mhm.
think it's
Mhm.
important to build coalition in that way, um, as well. And
Mhm.
yeah, I think that would be my points: to know the history, to ground in that history, to see the way that the history is reflected in our present systems, and then moving forward to build coalition to
Mhm.
rectify these injustices and respond to these systems and ultimately move towards reproductive justice. So I think,
That's
yeah, those would be my
amazing.
final thoughts.
Well, you know what? I know for a fact we're going to continue this. Don't be surprised, y'all, if this becomes common. We'll figure that out between us. Needs to happen. I would be happy to facilitate, a continual conversation on this. So before
Mhm.
we sign off, Jelena, how about you tell folks how to get in touch with you and Yale Bleeds if they have any questions or want to follow up?
Yes, of course. So Yale Bleeds. So we are on Instagram is one way you can get in touch at
Hey.
Yale Bleeds. I I'm on Instagram as well. My Instagram
Mhm.
is jay.sanai. And like I just any reproductive justice work that I might be doing would be included on there, as well as
Mhm.
actually this is it's so funny it didn't come up in this conversation, but I actually a couple years ago I founded a company and we make
Wait,
men
whoa. Pause.
and
How are we just now hearing this part?
it's crazy. All I was thinking so much about like the broader issues that I completely missed to say
That's you didn't miss it. What it was, well, what had happened was
like
you were waiting to mention it right now. So go right ahead.
yes, it was all part of the plan.
It was all.
um
That's right.
yes, I founded this company called Sinai Botanicals, and it is in my bio if you go to the Instagram. But basically, it's so quick little comments here. I'm actually the daughter of Jamaican immigrants, and I grew up in South Florida.
Hey, you know what? I knew it. I knew it. Go ahead. Shout out to the West Indies. Go ahead.
That part of that part of my growing up.
Booyaka.
Yeah.
You know what? You know what? I have to say this for your parents, and they'll
Mm,
appreciate. Tap your noise.
top.
Tap your noise, Jelena.
I'll have to
Guana.
tell. I'll have to tell them after this. But I mean, yeah, that was like a big part of the way I think about health and healing in general. Like
Yes,
being in my
yes,
grandmother's garden, for example, and seeing like all the different herbs and things she was growing and
yes,
the remedies. And so I
yes.
started this company, and we make menstrual teas, and
That's
we
amazing.
donate, yeah, to kind of help with like cramps, headaches, and different things like that. And we donate a part of the profits from the teas to kind of fund menstrual access with different organizations. So that is also included in like how you can reach me and different things right now. We are
That's
doing a kind
amazing.
of brand reorganization thing right now, so we're on a brief hiatus, but anything that
Hmm.
we do will be posted on the Instagram. So that is something else
And if you
that to
didn't write it
continue to
down,
share.
she's gonna share it with me, and I will include it when I post this.
Yes.
Right? So don't worry. We strategically work that out there. La LOL. Right? That's
Definitely.
that is amazing, and I love the homage to our West Indian roots because I'm
Yes.
a tea person myself. We're all like I'm talking to you now. I have incense burning. It's all about the energy. Comes
Mm,
down to the energy. So
yes.
much respect for that. And that's a topic by itself because here's the thing: the reproductive injustice in the West Indies. That is like
Yes.
it's
Yes.
painful. It's
Mm,
painful, because people don't necessarily acknowledge what happened there. Like, one of the things when I migrated from Trinidad and Tobago to America
mm,
that I found interesting was when I was reading about American history. Back then, I came here with the dream of becoming a lawyer,
mm,
right? Because I had another dream that got torn apart, and I figured, well, fine, I couldn't reach that one, so here we go with this. And what would happen is I would read the Constitution, and that, alongside the way American history is told,
mm,
would substantiate why I decided not to pursue law, right?
mm,
Because I couldn't understand why lynching is still legal.
mm,
And I also couldn't understand how you say that you ended slavery, but did you really?
yeah.
And also, there's so many things. The fact that um, they still have it that Columbus discovered this damn country. Come on
Mm,
now. Jesus.
yeah.
You cannot discover something if you were there second or fourth. Okay? That's not, that's not how a discovery goes, bro. You were the immigrant and you are the one that should have been deported. But we're going to talk about that one too.
A
Thank
very
you so
violent.
much for your time. Right?
Yes. A
I'm
very.
telling you, we have a lot to talk about. This young lady is not done. And you saw how organically that just went. So I'm not worried about it because we're going to dig. Next time she comes around, we're going to dig a little more into what Yale Bleeds is doing in the community and what we would
Yes.
like to see happen because that's the end goal here. We want to make sure that people see this is something that's starting off. that together we could help launch into something that's amazing and honestly past due. How about that?
Yes.
So thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for all that you shared. Has been a pleasure, and I can't wait till we talk again,
Yes, this is a wonderful
Selena.
conversation. Can't wait to speak with
It,
you again.
of course. Well, that's all for now. Fist up, smile on. This was CJ. Peace.